Lost Ones does a lot of things well, but the enemy deck is just plain stupid. Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and today I'm reviewing Lost Ones from Greenbrier Games, a game of exploration as you find yourself and various other children kind of just waking up in the middle of nowhere, waking up pulled from your beds, pulled from the streets, pulled from wherever you are, finding yourself in a new semi-separate world that exists outside of our own, but in some way linked within our own. From there, you start a narrative progression as you start exploring the island, as you wander around, and warning as I go through this that the most minor of spoilers as you see the first 10 cards or so, but not really spoilers, but if you care, then don't look, I guess. But you're going to start wandering around the map, and you're going to make choices as far as how you move and which locations you unlock. If I want to move up, I'm going to go ahead and pull card 13, if I can find it over here. Let's go ahead and grab card 13, and boom. We'll put card 13 down on the board, and then we can start wandering onto the card, resolving any effects that might be printed on that card. We're going to go ahead to this book over here. We're going to pull open the book, go to page 13 over there, find the associated tile, read the specific text. Before you stretch as a field, I'm not actually going to read more because that might be more spoilerific, but you're going to read this respective text of whatever tile you went onto, and you're going to resolve any icons that are on the card, often resulting in combat or the nightmare proceeding to hunt you down as you wander around the board. Why are you doing all this? Well, ultimately you're wandering around trying to find an ending. You're trying to find a way out, some sort of final endgame situation in which you resolve an escape, in which you leave this land. You find, I don't want to say things because I don't know how spoiler-free I want to get here. You find things, you find a way to escape, and then you resolve any story aspects that you hit along the way. There's a variety of story beats you can hit, encounters you can have, things you can become, and depending on what you've encountered, you'll resolve a whole bunch of story text at the very back of this book with different options of things that have happened to you and consequences of your exploration in this side world. That's the entire game. It's an exploratory game in which you wander around, engage with various elements, and then try to ensure that you stay alive or keep your resources handy because you have an ability deck in front of you. You have an ability deck that has a variety of symbols on the card, symbols that will be used in any number of different encounters. Again, let's just go ahead and flip something open over here, and you can see over here on this pathway, we can approach them for help, in which case we need 2 speech bubbles, or we can hide and listen, in which case we need a foot. We need one of those like fleeting feet or whatever it is. So you're going to be dealing with these various symbols you need in order to explore different options every time you have a choice. You wander upon a village. Do you hide? You need that icon. Do you engage and talk to them? You need that icon. You see a creature. Do you attack it? You'll need that icon. Do you try to run away? You'll need that icon. You're constantly dealing with the choices you have in front of you, choices that are not just a choose your own adventure, but a choose your own adventure with a currency behind it, the currency of the ability cards of your characters. Now your characters will have abilities at the same time, small little benefits that they have as far as, drawing a card after certain types of encounters, as far as always adding symbols to certain encounters. Your characters come with abilities to help you out as you go through this, and depending on the number of characters you have, will define how many ability cards you can actually draw as you start wandering around the map. If you stick together, there will be many benefits in terms of the quests you go on. Other characters can contribute and help you. At the same time, if you stick together, you'll also end up suffering a lot of the same consequences. More often than not, if you are together when bad things happen, you will end up both drawing cards from the Bane deck, both resolving extra consequences, so that choice and decision as far as how similar your pathway should be, as far as how together you should be as you journey around exploring, that's going to be part of what defines you. Now what you do as you go through the game is you start picking up hints. You start picking up various clues from various characters. You talk to someone there and they mention something else. As you find that other thing, you know that you should go east instead of north. As you go east instead of north, you talk to another person. You find out that maybe you shouldn't trust that first person. You talk to that person and you hear about a legend of something that was buried underground. You talk to someone else and they're trying to get that legend out and they're trying to help it escape. Someone else says you should keep it buried. There's all these choices that are all giving you a narrative flavor of the world you're engaging with. And this is a world in which you can expect to lose and restart. You don't have enough ability cards to do everything. You frequently have to make decisions as far as which interactions you engage with and which ones you just move on from because you can't afford to spend the ability symbols you want. Now you will have the opportunity to rest at a variety of points, and you'll go ahead and rest with various characters, often in the same spot, and then you'll refresh your hand of ability cards and advance the moon clock. If you ever advance the moon clock to the end, you lose the game. If you ever have the nightmare hunt you down, you lose the game. If you ever deal with a foe, if you ever have a foe attack you on a tile, and you don't have the ability cards necessary to defeat the foe, you lose the game. That's the one that's stupid, by the way. We're going to come back to that. But you're trying to figure out how to make your way through it, and if you lose, you at least walk back in with the knowledge of the things you've explored until now. You still know about that thing trapped underground. You still know that you should talk to the wolves. You still know that the serpent lies to the north. You still know all these other small little details that the game has given you, even though you're resetting. Even though you're kind of shocked awake as you find yourself in some sort of perpetual Groundhog's Day of information being fed your way, but the map slowly constricting around you, starting off in square one, choosing whether to pursue the same pathways and directions you chose already, or to try something new. Maintaining that knowledge, maintaining that memory, and diving back in, because you will need multiple plays through this in order to unlock the information you need to make those decisions, the information you need to understand what engagements add value and what engagements don't, because the occurrence of the engagements in this book will frequently have you referencing through this, where you're going to go through this rulebook here, and you're going to go through 160 or so different narrative options, 181 different narrative options of the choices and consequences of what you do, and that's Lost Ones. Rinse and repeat, use your ability cards, have encounters, make choices on this slight choose-your-own-adventure exploratory aspect of a world that exists here, a world that you have the opportunity to explore, a world that will give you different consequences and different outcomes if you find yourself actually succeeding, if you find yourself actually escaping, and again, stuff I can't say without getting too spoilerific. From there, let's go into ease of play. The game gives you a very simple to dive into rulebook. It's a handful of pages. Again, don't be intimidated by it. There's a lot of extra story stuff behind it, but you only have a handful of pages to go into, and it's very simple. You have an opportunity to move around, you take a certain number of actions, you draw a certain number of cards depending on the player count, and you just dive straight into it and just start trading in those ability icons for the various encounters you'll have with all the things you're encountering on all these hundreds of map tiles that you have in the game. The table space, it will start growing as you go through it, but it's fairly manageable. It's not over the top, it's not too large, and the game time, well, it varies as far as how stingy you're being with the symbols, how much you're trying to pursue exploration, and how far. I would say the sessions we've had ranged from 60 to 90 minutes generally, although I can see it being longer or shorter depending on how long you're taking with the experience. As far as player count, this is a 1 to 4 player game. I have played this solo, 2 and 3 player, as I dove into it in different ways with the same groups, but or parts of the same groups, I should be more specific. But this is a game that I find I preferred it most as a solo experience with me controlling multiple characters. I find that pure solo just doesn't have enough cards that you'll draw to be useful. You really feel like you can't make a single choice because you don't have enough cards from that one player. Now, while the game does lower the amount of cards you draw, the more players you have, the cumulative total is much higher the higher the player count. So there's a bit of a balance at play, and while I don't mind that balance at 2, 3, and 4, solo I just found way too restrictive as far as the card count that you had. So for me, playing it solo with multiple characters was my preferred way of going through it. Dealing with other characters as I go through it, I found kind of slowed down and didn't heavily add to my experience. I like this most as a solo experience with multiple characters. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking with Lost Ones, there's a solid amount of exploration going on in this game, and this game comes pre-baked in with a history and a story and a backdrop of what's going on. And that's a story that won't change, which will affect replayability, by the way, because the more you explore this, the more you can unlock these different narrative arcs. I think there's like 14 different narrative arcs, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe it's a little less than that. Maybe it's 12. Let's see. There are 12 different narrative arcs you can hit as you go through this. And these are just small little side stories wrapped up into the greater picture of ultimately how do you get out, how do you escape, how do you resolve the ending. And so that's going to give you different ways to approach the same game. You move this way, you'll encounter that. You move that way, you'll encounter that. This person will tell you about that. This person will tell you about that. And you can finish the game and have no idea how you could have unlocked those other beats, how you could have talked to somebody else or found additional information, how you could have resolved one of these different endings in different ways, because every single time you encounter something, you have an economy choice of how to spend your ability cards. And that does mean that you frequently don't choose to engage with things that you otherwise might. And even when you do, you're choosing between different options. And so there's a ton of different things going on as far as unlocking the information that the game gives you. Do not expect to unlock all those beats unless you are, well, heavily willing to dive into this again and again and again. And there's some decent sequencing and chaining of the story. You talk to one person, they give you information about this. You find this, and that gives you information about that. And that slow unlocking of finding yourself backtracking to prior tiles, encounters that you chose to skip because you wanted to conserve your ability cards, and then suddenly by talking to someone else, you find out that they were more important than you had thought. You make these educated judgment calls. There's only so many times you can flip through an encounter at the end and realize that you got no value out of that before you start becoming heavily more conservative with the cards that you're spending. But that does mean you talk to that one person, or thing, often thing more than person, person, and you understand that you have to go back and engage with that other thing and or person that you skipped the first time around. So there's a decent amount of story arc in the game, of chaining of what happens in the information flow that it's feeding you, and there's multiple story paths outwards. The combination of all that with the multiple story paths means there's a lot of exploration opportunity in what is a fairly small game. I mean, there's 160 so cards, whatever it is, I don't know the exact card count, but you have a bunch of cards you're going through, and there's a decent amount of story all wrapped in with all those choices, with those 181 decisions you are making through this game. As far as what I don't like about the game, the first thing is going to be that memory or notes kind of aspect. You see, as you go through the game, you frequently find yourself you find yourself unpacking or repacking the starting point and having to dive back into it. The problem is, if you didn't take notes along the way, and if you don't remember what happened, you might wander upon a card and you're like, did we hide last time, or did we fight? Did we run? Did we engage? Did we talk to them? What did we do? Or did we skip it entirely? Or, I know that thing said we should talk to something over here, but where was it? Was it to the northeast? Was it to the south? You find yourself frequently having to remember things and or take notes, and I don't love that aspect. While every time I dove back into it, I did remember large story notes or different aspects or tiles to avoid. There were certain aspects about that were easier to separate yourself. There's tiles you can become totally trapped in, and I didn't go back into those. But a lot of smaller things, you can easily find yourself having to deal with a memory or notes choice, and I don't love that about the game. You could solve that by taking notes. Every time something important enough happens, you can take a note, you can have a log of all the choices you made, but that seems to start adding busy work and homework to the experience, and so I just went with memory, but there's a cost to just going with memory. Additionally, and most importantly, the random combat death I really didn't like. What I mean by that is, when you engage with a foe, you're going to go ahead and flip a card, and you're going to have to give up certain symbols, and if you don't, very often, it depends on the foe you engage with, very often if you don't engage, if you don't deal with them, you will have to just simply die. That's it. There's no coming back from that. You have to give up 2 fight symbols, and you don't have them, well, it's game over. Okay, pack it all up, restart. I'd appreciate a degree of a little bit of grace. Maybe you advance the moon clock when you die instead, or when you lose to a foe, because right now, especially if you're early on the moon clock, if you've started to advance a little bit, if you've explored 8, 9 tiles and you start to get a taste for what's going on, and then you just happen to not have the right card in your hand when a beast engages with you, and there's no agency around that. That's pure luck of the draw. You draw a beast, yeah, well, if it would have wanted footprints, I could have done it. If it wants the fistly thingies, I can't do it. Oh well, I guess we're going to go ahead and pack it all up again. To the point that I stopped following that as a death mechanic because it just felt so anticlimactic. I started doing what I said. I started advancing the moon clock whenever I lost because it just felt less punishing. It felt like, okay, congratulations, luck of the draw means I have to completely restart this over, and I don't feel any degree of reward or agency or anything I could have done differently or better other than just never having less than 5 cards in my hand, which is impossible and not a strategic choice you should be making in the game. And so I do not like the random death mechanic from the beast. Again, I house ruled over that incredibly quickly because it just felt so frustrating to have the entire game wrap up as soon as you engage with a beast and simply died. I did not like that at all. Going back to the solo play that I mentioned as well, the solo play feels needlessly impossible to explore in terms of not giving you enough cards to actually engage with the game. Even with resting, you only have a small, finite amount of cards, and you'll have to repack up the game more and more than I would ideally like to. I understand and almost appreciate the desire to have the game reset, to have a lose condition in place, and then to walk back in with a memory of what's going on. A kind of, again, a Groundhog's Day approach to the genre. And I like that, but I don't want that to happen too frequently. Too frequently that you're wrapping it up and it starts to become tedious. It starts to lose its charm and starts to become an unnecessary chore to the game. And so things like solo play or the foe deck, those are things that started to drift the game towards tedious homework assignments as opposed to an enjoyable exploratory experience. As far as I can see others not liking, honestly, not really a lot. The main things I would see being a problem for you are, well, ultimately, if you don't like narrative exploration games, this is heavily a narrative exploration game. This is a game that's all about the exploration. Past that, the other issues I would say are the things I already mentioned myself. But if you like exploration, if you like the sense of trying to figure out what's going on in this game, of looking, there's some degree of looking at cards, getting clues, but I wouldn't heavily say I got much out of that. I would say for the most part, the simple choices of exploring the world were satisfying, were enjoyable, but it's a very mechanically light game. It's a game that focuses far more on uncovering everything as opposed to the clever card play or the choices you can make that are tactically sound. This is a game of exploration. This is a game of story. This is a game of discovery. That's why you should be signing up for this. As far as final thoughts on Lost Ones, if this were a computer game with notes or with memory or some shared idea of being able to reference at any given point what I did last time, what tiles were in play, if it had that aspect and it took away some of the needless spending of ability cards, a precious commodity just because I couldn't remember what I did. More often than not, if I went to a tile that I had in some way interacted with, but I didn't remember the outcome, I skipped it and went to the next one. I didn't want to spend cards, precious ability cards, on finding out what the other option was. I'd rather go somewhere new entirely, push the boundaries of the map a drop more. And then combine that with the restarting elements, and Lost Ones is both a solid narrative journey that gives you enough exploration that it is rewarding and satisfying. I would say a little gateway adjacent in terms of being an exploratory game. There are a lot of things that are a lot more complex, give you a lot more room for exploration, but I think Lost Ones is a good gateway exploratory game that I wish some of the mechanics were polished a bit more. Overall, this is a 3 out of 5 for me. A few too many small complaints around a game that doesn't have that many mechanics to begin with pushes this into a zone where I had fun with it, I enjoyed my time with it, but it's also not one that I'm tremendously in love with either. It's a good starting point, but one that I wish some things were a bit different on. As far as other game recommendations, Seventh Continent is going to be a game that has some small degree of similarity with Lost Ones, although significantly larger in scope, as well as in mechanics, as well as in barrier to entry, as well as in cost. Seventh Continent is an entirely different beast, but if you like the taste of what Lost Ones offered, Seventh Continent is a great next step. Again, it will cost more, it will take more time, more energy, more attention, and will be significantly more engaging, although it also suffers from that whole notes and memory problem. But it's a good next step if you enjoyed what Lost Ones gave you. And if you're looking for something with a little bit more focus on mechanics while still leaning into the exploratory aspect, Unsettled from Orange Nebula will give you the opportunity to explore multiple different planets as opposed to resetting on the same one that you're on, each one giving you a different twist and focusing a lot more on the mechanical intertwining along with the story and exploration at the same time. And that's basically it. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. Hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, have a good one.